Connecticut goes back-to-back for the first time since Florida. In 2006 and 07, UConn wins a second consecutive national championship. Now make that 6 since 1999. That's double the amount of even North Carolina and Duke, the next closest. Both schools with 3 in the last 25 years. 6 national championships in the past 25 NCAA tournaments. 2 straight for Dan Hurley. Where does college basketball run through? Where is that peak and pinnacle of the sport? Some would argue it is Storrs, Connecticut. But others, based on history, might say it's in Lawrence, Kansas, or maybe on Tobacco Road between Chapel Hill and Durham, North Carolina, or maybe way out in bluegrass country in Lexington, Kentucky. And even after you win your second consecutive national championship, when the big news of the past 36 hours in college basketball is John Calipari leaving Kentucky to go to Arkansas, of course, Dan Hurley was asked about that Kentucky job opening last night after winning a national championship. And here is what he had to say. Quote, yeah, I don't think that's a concern. My wife, you should have her answer that. End quote. Virtually saying, I'm staying at UConn. Now, Dan Hurley, for all Kentucky fans, is that number one potential head coaching candidate on that list. If you could have a dream candidate, it might be Dan Hurley. Now with Calipari's exit, who do you think Kentucky targets first and foremost?
Yeah, and again, just to talk about like Dan Hurley, and this is just the job of his agent, which probably is the easiest job you're ever going to have. You dial the area code up to Storrs, Connecticut. You talk to the school president before you can even say anything. He goes, how much do you want? Here's what I want. I'm going to stay here. And then Dan Hurley at the championship celebration goes, I'm not going anywhere, and I just signed a new 5-year extension here that's going to pay me as the highest paid coach in the land. And rightfully so, that should happen. But there are some good opportunities here to go to Kentucky. Here's the question. Talking about Kevin yesterday on the radio, and I think it's fascinating. Like, Coach Cal is such an imposing figure to try to replace. Not because you say, well, Donnie, he only won 1 national championship. Look, it's hard to win any national championship or make runs at national championships. He got one a decade ago. But the one thing that Kentucky fans liked over the years was every year, like, talk about free agency in the NFL. When your team, forget about what they do on the field. If they win free agency, man, there's so much excitement coming up to the season, which you had at Kentucky, which every year were lottery pick after lottery pick. Eventually you would figure that is going to work in your favor, and it didn't. So now he moves on to Arkansas. There's a big void there because when you go to Kentucky, it's not like, okay, let's rebuild the program. It's, well, we fired the last guy because he couldn't win championships. Yeah. And you know going in, that's going to be what the test is going to be. But if you don't get a guy like a Dan Hurley that walks in that situation and goes, what do you think I'm here to do? Like, lose games? Like, no, I expect to win next year. Like, okay, let's reinvigorate this fan base. You had Tubby Smith there, and then you go to Billy Gillespie. It didn't work out. That was 2 years like, look, this didn't work. We got to cut ties, and we got to pay a lot of money for Calipari to come over from Memphis. Yeah. So my question is, at this point here, that's a big-time job with a lot of money, but which coaches out there would be able to say, you know what? I like the money. I love this pressure. And I know in 3 years, if I don't at least get to a championship final, they're going to fire me.
I think it's very hard to argue that Connecticut is not the spot in college basketball at this moment, that UConn is not the premier program in college hoops. There's always going to be narratives around the teams from Duke and North Carolina, and we'll look at the odds next year. But if you are Dan Hurley and you are looking for elevation, there is only a couple of spots that really present that opportunity that could be even considered an upgrade over UConn, or at least a higher and more difficult challenge. Kentucky would be one of them. Kentucky's job, if the next head coach is successful, is not going to come open each and every couple of years. It is not a platform program. It is the end goal. It is that destination on arrival. So that's where it's intriguing for Dan Hurley. Motivationally, has he said, hey, I've gone back to back. I've done all I can here. It's the most dominant 2-year run we have seen in this sport in the last 2 decades. I don't believe so. I think he remains the head coach at UConn. But with that said, DRS, Kentucky is going to offer him a very large sum of money that ultimately, I believe, Connecticut will match in terms of that upgrade and the raise for Dan Hurley. But Kentucky has to make Hurley say no, and I believe the Cats will do just that.
Yeah, and talk about Kentucky as an NBA program in the college landscape. That's how big it is. Like, Rupp Arena is filled up with 20,000 people every single game, win or lose. They're going to get angry. That's a great and passionate fan base. You try to equate, like, some of the blue bloods of the past 25 years. You can include Villanova, right? Multiple national champions. Jay Wright, fantastic head coach. But when Jay Wright was leaving Villanova, we didn't see a lot of major national coaches go, hey, let me step into Villanova. That's an awesome program.
Yeah.
Because the program was built upon Jay Wright, and to live up to those multiple national championships at Villanova is going to be hard to do. You see what Kyle Neptune is going through right now.
Right.
Eventually, maybe he gets his grounding, but maybe not. You expected somebody to take over. That's what you're talking about pressure at UConn, too. Like, who would they replace at Dan Hurley? But I don't think he's leaving at this point because he has something really good at this time.
Yeah.
It's a true blue blood. It's his program now. He's won 2. It's not to say, well, Hurley won 1 and the other 2 guys got 2, so he's really not the pro. Like, he feels like he's the guardian of UConn now, and he's young enough to say, I can have a legacy like Mike Krzyzewski and also maybe like a Roy Williams going over from Kansas back to his home, team of North Carolina, or even Dean Smith at that point, where you can build upon that legacy. They're going to love him no matter what, and he's going to get a grace period. In 5 years, if they haven't won a national championship or made a Final Four, they're going to be like, hey, stick around another 5 years. I know you'll get this thing back. You're not going to have that luxury at Kentucky.
We'll talk with JY about this very thing later on in our third hour. A guy that coached against Dan's father, the famous Bob Hurley Sr. in Jersey City. He knows the Hurley family has very strong ties to this portion of the country in the Northeast, which I think the geography does play a factor into this conversation as well. But I will say this. When Jay Wright bowed out, it was a shocker because he just led Villanova to a Final Four. John Calipari is one of the most successful head coaches in the history of this sport. At UMass, at Memphis, at Kentucky with a national championship. But what Cal leaves behind is a spurned fan base hoping for success with one of the strongest traditions and histories in this sport. Because Kentucky has not seen the second weekend of the NCAA tournament since 2019. 2020, there was no big dance. 2021, they didn't reach the NCAA tournament. 2022, bounced in the opening round by St. Peter's. Last year, they got bounced by Kansas State in the round of 32. And, of course, this year, bounced by the Oakland Golden Grizzly in the round of 34. And John Calipari's model has been get the most and highly talented freshmen that we can, develop them for the next level, and just hope that overall talent wins at this level. And guys like Trey Mitchell were there, and the veteran guard of Antonio Reeves. Not to say that Calipari is not adjusting to the current climate of college basketball in the transfer portal and NIL era, but it has not worked in Lexington over the last 5 years. And I think if you are Kentucky, you're okay with Cal making the move to Fayetteville because you didn't have to pay the $33 million buyout, and you can take that large sum of money and invest it on the next head coach to get that big fish out there. So if it's not Dan Hurley, you saw that potential list of candidates. We also had, during the national championship game last night, Alabama's Nate Oates released a statement that said, I am committed to this program here in Tuscaloosa, a.k.a. they just paid me a boatload of money to stay here to be the head man for the Crimson Tide. Billy Donovan, former head coach at Florida, currently in the NBA with the Chicago Bulls. He has been rumored. Scott Drew, a very successful head coach at Baylor, also should be in the mix. A couple of other SEC coaches like Bruce Pearl, maybe Chris Beard at Ole Miss are going to be in consideration. Would Pitino go back to Kentucky? Would they want him at this stage of his career? That would be a rather fascinating idea. So who do you think that next man up is in Lexington?
You have to have a pretty good profile of what you want because, like, Tubby Smith was very reserved and a very good coach and won a national championship. You take a look at Billy Gillispie, which only 2 years, so you really didn't get a feel for that. But John Calipari, again, is a looming object there. I mean, he was the boss. It was like Pat Riley when you start to deal with the Los Angeles Lakers and the Miami Heat, like the Don of South Beach. You knew who ran the show. And the question comes into is, we knew going into that meeting, right, the $33 million buyout. They didn't come into the meeting and say, you know what, John, you're my guy. Like, we want you here for like 5 more years.
No.
That meeting came together basically and said this, John, we can't fire you because we can't afford it. So good luck. And nobody wants to not be wanted, right? Even at a big program, and I have all this cachet. You want to go, and Arkansas is going to love him there because he's going to bring instant stability right away with maybe a chance to win a national championship and get a lot of high-level recruits. But Kentucky itself, you need that big personality. It's kind of crazy in a guy that doesn't translate into multiple national championships, but I think Bruce Pearl will be perfect in Kentucky.
For sure.
He's got that mindset. He can take over the crowd. He can win over the airwaves. He can bring in the talent. It's a lot of fun. Like Auburn, he resuscitated that program into a fun one.
No doubt.
Now you can level up. Now, getting back to Nate Oates, who I know a lot of people figure, like, that'd be a great move here. Alabama's on better footing to me than Kentucky is right now. Like, why would he leave and take that pressure when he is a king and has a great thing going in Alabama and gets a ton of money? Also, keep in mind, it's an $18 million buyout.
Right.
The people out there like, hey, They just avoided 30. Now they can afford to pay this. And what, pay him 8 on top? Like, no, you're going to be losing money after bringing the coaching staff and all that stuff as well. They don't just stay at Alabama, but I think Bruce Pearl is a perfect fit at Kentucky.
The investment is always going to be there from Big Blue Nation. That is zero doubt behind it. So now we look at next year's national championship odds. In college basketball, like all of collegiate athletics, starting in this next academic year is going to look different based on conference realignment. But college basketball is also going to look slightly more different because of the NIL era and the end of the G League Ignite and that idea of the best pro prospects spending their year out of high school somewhere else. Duke has 5 of the 18 top-rated recruits in this 2024 class that will all be in Durham next season, and probably some more that will return to John Shire in his third year. It is why the Blue Devils are 11-1, booked as the national championship favorites for next season. Kansas, second best number at 12-1. UConn, the two-time now reigning national champs, at 15-1, alongside Alabama, North Carolina, and Houston. Arizona at 20-1. And then there is a group of 5 teams at 30-1, tied for that 8th best price, including Purdue and Rutgers, because of all the talent that the Scarlet Knights are bringing in next year's freshman class. You saw Kentucky at 30-1. Yep. I wonder what that number looks like when they solidify the head coaching position. And you also might have saw Arkansas at 40-1, but they're off that top 10, so a little bit back. Arkansas now has John Calipari, who understands that he needs to win. And the Razorbacks did not reach the NCAA tournament this year under Eric Musselman, but they had been to the Sweet 16 in the last 3 at the very least, and 2 berths in the Elite 8. They are not Kentucky from the blue blood distinction. They don't have the history of the Cats. But Arkansas is a very talented basketball program, and Bud Walton Arena is one of the most electric atmospheres in all of the sport. So what do you think John Calipari does in his first year in Fayetteville? And maybe more importantly, DRS, what should the expectation be for Cal, now the head coach of the Hogs?
I mean, you hire a guy like that, the expectation always should be national championship. But we have to be honest with ourselves. We don't know the complete status of that team, who's going to be on the team next year, and also implementing your game plan and also the structure of your program. But we know Calipari in year number 2 is going to be expected to take 5 out of the top 20 players in the nation, sell them on, you'll be an NBA player at the end of the season. That should be good enough here. So expectations next year for me is making the tournament. After that, it goes right back to why you hired him. Yeah. Arkansas didn't hire Calipari to say, let's sell tickets. You brought it up yesterday. Bud Walton Arena is one of the best environments in college basketball and should be a lot of fun. It wasn't a ticket seller. It's like, now you need to take us to the next level.
Right.
Olin Richardson back in the day, who was able to do that with a championship over Duke in the final. I'm interested to see what he does. But next year, you got to make the tournament. Then it's right back to, Cal, you better start winning championships here.
Cal, you better get us to a Sweet 16, something you failed to do in the last 5 years at Kentucky. Some very intriguing numbers that we will see already for college basketball this upcoming season. But we've got a lot of time to break down next year.